Your alternative talk radio contact, The Planet, KGRAradio.com.
With infinite complaisance, people went to and fro of the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
So, Thomas, we're here to talk about your upcoming film, Aurora, which is based upon the, of course, very famous UFO crash in Texas in 1897. But before we jump into that story and the film, of course, can we just get a little background on you personally and some of your past works?
Yeah, I've been working as a gallery director for the last 20 years for Century Guild, which is now in Los Angeles. And I've written a lot of art books. We did monographs on Gail Pataki and Clive Barker and David Mack. And so, yes, this is kind of part of a series of projects that I've done that are kind of my personal art. The first one was a wax cylinder record that I did a couple years ago. And this is the next step in entirely uncommercial art projects that I've developed for myself.
Now, Century Guild, that's your gallery, right?
Correct.
Nice.
Yes.
Oh, it's skipping a little bit. Come on, Skype, you can do it. Hang in there. I'm knocking on wood, and I'm not going to do it for the recording, but okay. So, yeah, so I went to the Kickstarter, of course, because you've got that nice preview, and you're talking about why you're doing the Kickstarter, and of course we're going to get into that. But what made you pick, before we talk about the actual case, what made you pick the Aurora crash in Texas?
I think that probably the impetus was, you get caught up in life in terms of, excuse me, loving esoteric horror and weird Italian 70s movies and just all the different things that we get into. And I'm a dad now. And so I have a 4-year-old son. And I've been spending a lot of time thinking about, God, what was I really into when I was a kid? And there are things that I'm still into, but you try to whittle it down. And one of the things that always meant the world to me when I was a kid were the little scholastic school books that we would get that had the weird ghost story, Strange But True and those kind of things. And so that was where the root of that came from, was the idea that, this really strange thing that's in the history books, that you have a different perspective of it as an adult, but when you're younger, it kind of holds all of this mystery. And so my writing partner and I were looking at those kind of stories and coming up with the most insane rationalizations that we could for what really happened. And the Aurora one was the one that we thought we came up with the best story for.
Now, have you always been into UFOs, or is it kind of all over the board for everything?
I've definitely been a fan of UFOs. I think, and this is part of what lays into the story, is I think that my perception of what they are has evolved. When you're a kid, you think that there's a big metal saucer flying around with a pilot in it, and then maybe as you get older, you start to think about different dimensions or things like that. And so it's something I've always been, as long as I can remember, I think the first books I had were UFO and cryptid and things like that. So it's still an interest today, but part of this movie was kind of taking it back to the place where I perceived it kind of in my first couple decades on the planet, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I really enjoyed watching the Kickstarter and seeing some of the still images you had on set, because I'm a huge fan of Western movies. Like Tombstone is one of my favorites, and also yours it's going to be shot all in black and white. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's already been filmed. It's edited. We're on the Kickstarter for post-production, but yeah, the whole thing is black and white. It's meant to be an homage to Universal monsters in the Twilight Zone and 1950s television westerns and things like that. But yeah, it's all black and white. Definitely influenced by film noir and the idea of using those kind of shapes. And it just, to me, it lent the mystery and drama that it needed to for this 19th century story.
Well, yeah, let's get everybody a background if they're not familiar at all with the Aurora, Texas crash. And this was in 1897. And yeah, just give them a little bit of a background on that and why it's such because I've heard this mentioned by a lot of researchers that they feel that to them, they'll name 2 or 3 or 4 cases where they say, well, this one's really hard to explain away. And it's like one of their top ones. I have heard this crash mentioned a number of times. It's everyone that I speak to, when I say, it's about the first UFO crash in American history, 9 times out of 10 people say to me, oh yeah, Roswell. Right.
And it's like, no, in the 1890s, there were a lot of UFO sightings. And in April of 1897 at 5 o'clock in the morning, there was a crash. And we have a newspaper clipping from the period, historically, the royal we of the internet, that talks about that this ship had crashed, that it crashed through Judge Proctor's windmill at 5 a.m., and there was a signal services officer that was there that was able to document it. And then they buried the materials of the crash in the well and gave the body that they recovered at the crash a proper Christian burial in their cemetery. And that sounds like it would be big news to us today, but it only rated this one little paragraph in the papers at the time. It was just kind of, I think that with what was happening with Percival Lowell looking at Mars, people were just kind of assuming, this is probably how things are going to be now. And so it went unnoticed. There were attempts over the last century to explore some of the different elements, like, for example, the materials that were put into the well. There was an outbreak of sickness. A researcher in the 1960s found metal in the cemetery that defied explanation. And so it's definitely, if you are a fan of things that don't have rational endings, it is a very rich subject.
Where is that metal now, Thomas? Do we know at all?
I don't know. People have asked me that, and I did my newspaper research. There's a great website called newspapers.com, and if you type in things like Aurora, aircraft, things like that, it'll search databases of newspapers. So I was able to find these stories. But yeah, the name of the researchers that are in there from the 60s, I'm expecting someone is going to be mentioning to me, especially after interviews like this,
right,
that they tracked those people down. Because someone did email me maybe 3 or 4 days ago and said, do you know where that thing is now? And I to be honest, my research was meant to fuel the story.
Right.
And I would read things like that and print it out and be like, this is fascinating. But I didn't follow up to see where those things were. I was trying to support a very absurd story that I had in my head, which is the D Glock connection. So yeah, so I didn't climb in my car to go look for the fragments.
Right. Yeah. Maybe that's for another project. Yeah. And Absurd is great, by the way. And we'll talk about the storyline, which I love. And there's a word I won't even, maybe I will try to pronounce it when it comes up and we'll see how I do. But you probably know which one I'm talking about, the pilot. But, okay. So speaking of the pilot, so the pilot, yeah. I'm sure you've heard it butchered many times and it will happen again today, I'm sure. So now, still staying on the actual accounts here. The body of the pilot that they gave this wonderful Christian burial to, which I'm sure it meant the world to it. They made a point of mentioning
that.
Yeah, I love that. It meant the world to that creature, that being.
A body was found dead on the scene and was given a proper Christian burial in Aurora Cemetery. And I remember just thinking, I love that they made a point.
You can see them putting their hands up, like, "Well, we're done here. See, did our part. Christian burial, boom,
exactly,
handled business." Was there any description, or is there any description anywhere of what this pilot looked like?
No, there wasn't. I mean, they used the word Martian.
Okay.
But
so maybe a classic, possibly, if that's the closest thing we can think of. If someone back then would say Martian, I guess, but I don't know. I think our popular culture has maybe our Martian might be way different than what someone in the 1800s might say. So,
yeah, I mean, there's definitely, there were a lot of strange airship sightings in the 1890s, and I think that, I mean, if you're really going to get into it, my belief is. That they're when it comes to Aurora, there's a lot of really, really interesting things in the way that it doesn't quite fit together enough that it does make it where if people spent their whole lives researching this, it could keep you moving. Because, like, for example, here's one thing. So the sergeant, Weems, 2 years after the crash, he disappears from the historical record. So it's like, well, why did that happen? Well, the skeptic in me would say because this particular crash falls more under the hoax category because of some of the sociological things that were happening around the town at the time. The conspiracy theorist in me says, well, what if it's because he was a time traveler? Like, you immediately leap to the most crazy thing.
Right.
So I think that's part of why people are so fascinated by the crash, is because if you really, there's just enough data there that if you want to believe in it, things don't line up so that you could argue your point and someone couldn't really tell you're wrong. Do you know what I mean? There's newspaper reports. There's the fragment they found in the 60s. There's the fact that everything that went into the well, that all of the livestock got ill. Like, there's a lot of things that don't let it just rest with a newspaper clipping that was a hoax. But what I tried to do with our story was say, okay, if you look at all of these things, rather than try to explain it in a rational way, like, how far could you take it into irrationality? And then that's how I got into I guess I'm leading myself into Die Glock again, and I'm going to stop there before I get us there.
No, that's okay. It's the time to segue. You've done this many times, obviously, yeah. So that's what I loved about reading what this was, what the backstory was. And the big what if that you came up with is the fact that there are conspiracy theories out there that German scientists, they developed some kind of an anti-gravity kind of a technology in the 40s. And of course, you're like, well, this happened in 1897, so how would the 40s? You're like, okay, well, like you just mentioned, time travel. Of course, they go back, they're messing around with something, and it goes wrong, and it crashes, right?
Well, this is where it gets into, some of where the personal belief overlaps with the storytelling. I really think that when you start to get into things like when you're talking about anti-gravity and whatever this So yeah, I mean, yeah, to back up, so basically, yes, there's a community that believes that the flying saucers in the 40s were actually German aircraft that were experimental ships called Die Glocke or the Bell, that these bell-shaped, I don't know what you would call them, anti-gravity craft, were responsible for a lot of the sightings, if not all of them. And so the idea that I had was, okay, well, what if the UFOs that we were seeing then and the UFOs that we were seeing in the 1890s were part of the same thing, kind of like a, if you shift your angle when you look at the world, there's a different shape that takes form. And the idea that this anti-gravity engine, the way that it was working, could have some dimensional consequences. So we took this kind of hyper-sophisticated late 20th century view of, dimensions and applied it to this very old black and white, almost silent film looking aesthetic. And so there's a weird juxtaposition there that I'm really proud of, that if you go into this as a 21st century viewer, even though it feels and looks very old, the concepts in storytelling are pretty modern and sophisticated. So the idea was just, what if that 1897 crash and the 1940s sightings were the same thing? And then that was our starting point. What if it's almost kind of like a backdrop? What if all the UFOs were actually because someone really did develop this technology? And I don't know if I'm getting too far off point.
No, not at all. Yeah, and in fact, for this film, are you going off the idea that, the Nazis did get it at some point from an actual alien crash, or that they developed the anti-gravity on their own?
Without giving too much away, the answer is that the actor Robert Bolter plays a test pilot, and that's the word that you were talking about. It's Die Fledermaus. And Fledermaus means bat. It's basically the Batman. And so the idea that we took is the way that the Nazis had the eagle crest with the swastika, that we had this science division. So there's a bat over the, and we had this fantasy painter named Bram design a latex and leather spacesuit that would have been from the 1940s of the test pilot crashing in the Wild West. So you've got this juxtaposition of the stone and brick and, leather and horses. And then you've got this latex 1930s sports car looking, leather suit.
I love the
around.
look of the suit, by the way. Very cool.
Yeah, I'm so proud. I'm really happy that it turned out the way it did. The only thing that I gave Bram as direction is I showed him a bunch of 1930s Italian sports cars and said, you got to imagine if it's the Nazis and money's no object and they hire the best designer, how would they make a deep sea diving suit look like a sports car? And so he came up with this great helmet and, the shoulder pad idea is all that stuff was his, and it turned out great. And then we hired this fashion company. I started to talk to some costume designers, and the conversations weren't resonating the right way. And I realized that really what we were looking for was more of a fashion thing than like a superhero suit. Mm-hmm. And so we spoke to this group called Ritual that does really, really beautiful leather work and a lot of very kind of fetishy, but in a very romantic way. And so they knocked it out of the park. They absolutely made a really great visualization of Brahms' drawings and paintings, and it was absolutely out of place in this ghost town to see this guy walking around in a leather Nazi space pilot. suit.
Yeah, that's what I like from the stills of when you guys were actually filming. I'm like, look at this guy in this. It's a badass looking suit. There's no other way to say it. And then it's that juxtaposition of, in the background, there's the wooden planks for the saloons and the general stores, and it's very set in this Western scene. I love it.
Yeah, it worked. I mean, it's a little more subtle when it's in black and white because it's more texture. There were definitely moments where I was looking at it and thinking, oh man, I wish should we do this in color? But it was like, this was our vision. Mm-hmm. We're going to stick to it and do that. And, it's a half an hour short film. So there's there are no exciting fight scenes with him in the costume. It's there's definitely a lot more that could be done with it, but we'll see what happens. But for the photos and the filming, it was really beautiful. And that juxtaposition, I mean, that we're talking about, I think that's the real thing that we were trying to do with the movie is just, doing something with UFOs in the Wild West has been done before. Even kind of exploring some of the the Die Glock things has been done before, but I hadn't seen anyone combine cowboys and Nazis, put those two kind of into the cauldron together. Yeah. So that was a big reason why we decided to go this direction, was just because aside from the fact that I really like the idea that I guess I'll say the second first. The second part is that it hadn't been done before, but then the other part that's kind of the meat of it is I'm such a fan of letting your brain explore, whether it's UFOs or cryptids or all the things that we tried to work into this story. Mm-hmm. What we tried to do was make it where when the movie ends, everything matches the historical record. So theoretically, it could be true. You know what I mean? Like we made it where it's not like there's anything that's left at the end that doesn't perfectly match everything that happened in history. And part of the excitement about researching and loving these parts of the unknown is that exploration of possibility. And so, even though I'm joking about it because we did pull it into an absurd place, these are all things that I knew way too much about just because I've spent so much time being fascinated by the idea of German airships in the 40s. And, I've got a textbook from 1905 that in the chapter where they talk about the other planets, they talk about how we know there's life on Mars because we can see their canals.
Oh, wow.
So the idea that was taught in 1905, that was just a real thing. So just the way that our perception keeps changing and keeps evolving on what any of these mysteries are or could be, that's really what we were trying to fuel with this movie, was the idea that it's fun to what's the word? I don't want to say imagine, but to lay all the puzzle pieces on the table and try to figure out, well, how do they go together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we'll never know. That's the thing. I mean, I used to be more optimistic and think that one day there was going to be, some treasure trove of data that would open up and then we would start to understand everything. And the older I get, it's just like the best we can do is theories, right. So for me, that's the exciting part. It's like, God, how do you lay all these things on the table and make them fit together? And that to me was the funniest part of this, is how much the more that I research, even after the movie is done, the more that it actually still works. And I'm not saying I really think this is what happened. I'm just saying that's.
But it's great for a film. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's also fascinating to me to that you keep digging deeper, and it's like I literally just, I don't know, maybe last week found a website that had all of this research I'd never seen talking about different aspects of the time travel and dimensional aspects of the Die Glocke ships. And I thought that I had come up with that. And maybe I read it when I was younger or something. But, you know, there are decades worth of people writing on these things. And like I said, it all fits together. So I'm waiting for some old German man to come up to me at a scrreening and say,
yes. Yeah. Confession time, right? He's like, well, deathbed confession. Exactly. You're spot on there, Thomas. It's amazing. Hey, it could happen. Crazier things have happened. Yeah. Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, right?
That is very true.
Okay, now, Thomas, I can't let you get away with our whole little, teaser of Aurora and why we're here today without maybe touching a little on Pango. Because that thing is amazing.
Yeah, he's, when we launched the Kickstarter, we were trying not to say anything. Like, we didn't reveal the pilot, we didn't reveal the creature, and then I realized in 2017's iBlink culture, where you blink and you're already on to the next thing in the feed, that we did kind of need to reveal more of it. So that's when we started adding in the production photos with him. And the idea there really came from the two things there were three things. I mean, the three things I was most into when I was young were ghost stories, UFOs, and cryptids. And so the idea that Pango, we basically tried to come up with the idea of, a non-traditional, like not using Bigfoot, but creating a creature that would be more of a cryptid than an alien, because he's not from another planet. And, just creating yet another element to the story. I normally don't stammer this much. I'm trying to figure out how much to say and not say.
It's okay. I totally understand, because you don't want to give away too much. I just thought he was one of the most striking. Oh my God, I love the tintypes, by the way, that I'm seeing on the Kickstarter website. Is the tintypes? I'm in love with tintype. I wish I could just have a photo, room to do tintypes all day. The tintype of Pango was my favorite one.
Yeah. So you'll laugh at this. So the photos that we planned to use to promote is we went out into the woods and took all these pictures of Pango where you could barely see him through the trees. Mm-hmm. And the idea was going to be like Dogman photos or something, like, right. To leak these and be like, we found this tintype of this monster. And like I said, just the accelerated scale. Some of my friends at Kickstarter were looking at that photo that you just mentioned, and they said that needs to be your cover photo. And I was like, just really lay it out and go for it. And they're like, yeah, you gotta just put it all on the table.
You're like, but he's so clear and beautiful.
Yeah, I was
right?
like, but
all
you
in
could see
face.
him. And they were like, no, it's such a great photo.
It's
so
amazing.
This photographer, we used to do San Diego Comic-Con, and one day I was walking from the hotel to the convention center. And there was a guy set up doing tintype photos on one of the side streets. And I had done this wax cylinder record, and we had a photographer do tintype photos for the cover. So I was familiar with the technology, but this was very out of place and an exciting thing to see. I struck up a conversation with him and got a couple pictures taken right there and just kept in touch with him. Really super, super nice. And then when I was making this movie, normally they have a set still photographer there. Mm-hmm. And I called him and said, do you want to come out to the desert for a week and take pictures of Nazis and monsters and cowboys? Mm-hmm. And he said, absolutely. And so he set up in the general store a little lab. And because even when you go in the buildings, I mean, this whole thing was built specifically to be like a living museum. So, I mean, it wasn't like you walked into the general store and then there's a modern sink. Mm. So he had to bring in tubs of his own water, and but it was set up there. And so then when people weren't filming, like if you're filming with these 4 actors, the other 2 actors would then go over and get their picture taken. And we didn't film with the monster until the last 2 days. So for the first few days, there's a lot of shots of this big monster in the Wild West town. But having the tintype photographer there really captured something special. I mean, it was a really nice way to see all the costumes and all the characters come to life. And that's why we tried to use it in the promotion materials.
I visited aurorafilm.com, and I think that the interview with Pango was just hilarious. Seeing him and he's got his apron on and a glass of wine in front of him, and he's like, you're like, move over, Gordon Ramsay. I'm like, yeah, go Pango. Great.
Well, so what happened with him was that, again, we wanted to keep him completely secret. Like, we didn't even, for the longest time, we were thinking we shouldn't even tell people there's a monster in the movie. Like, let it be a big reveal.
Yeah.
And then again, that internet thing, like, the way that we have to look at it now is that there are people that will see this that don't know anything about it. But during a crowdfunding stage, people really have to be in the loop on it. And so for us, the Pango costume was so elaborate and so fun that he really became almost the star of the movie, you know. And I'll give it away. The thing is that we think that he's the nemesis. We think that he's the monster. But what we find out at the end of the movie is that he's actually the only person in the film that is beyond reproach. Like, he's the only, like, all he wants to do is kill the Nazi. And I won't get into why, but basically he's almost revealed at the end to be more like Chewbacca than an animal. So he's an intelligent creature, and the way that it's set up is you think that it's just like a big lion or a big, just like a big wolf or something. But we do reveal that he's intelligent, and so the idea then that he is kind of someone that took on a life of his own is very much a part of all of our lives now. He sits in my library.
I was just going to ask where Pango is. I was like, I hope, Thomas, you have Pango in your house. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's funny because he's set up with a child's ABC book. And I was like, why did you put that in his hand? And whoever put it in there said, because he's only 1 year old. He's trying to learn the alphabet. And it was very funny. And so we were having a meeting about, gosh, what should we do with all this promotion stuff? And I was admittedly saying very traditional things. Oh, well, we should do this and ask different people to tweet and do this. And someone said, I think we need to take a picture of Pango baking in the kitchen. And this was on a Sunday.
Yeah.
And then we all laughed so hard. And then I capitulated and was like, you're right. It is a really funny idea. So without giving too much away, we actually have a lot of plans in our marketing that have shifted into we made a little cute enamel pin of the monster. There's actually a lot of stuff that we're going to do with him. It's just too fun of a creation, and
yeah, it's amazing.
And too cuddly.
Yeah, I mean, I would still be cuddly with him. He looks friendly enough, as long as you're not, one of the Nazis. It sounds like you're on the good list.
he looks horrific in the film. He's definitely
in the pictures,
covered
a lot
in
of teeth.
blood.
Yeah.
When you see him sitting in a library, he's so adorable, and it's really cute and funny. And
the ABC book is amazing.
But that's part of why I think the movie is so fun, is because, okay, it's a Western. Okay, we introduce the spacesuit stuff. Okay, it gets into like that high theatrical drama. And then for the final scene, we work in all of these dynamic elements of the monster movie. And kind of like, I don't know, with any thing that scares you, it's like, all the Halloween costumes of little dogs dressed up as it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, just because something is scary doesn't mean that you can't pull it into this other fun place. And so I think that's better that than trying to make little Nazi stuffed animals.
Right. Well, Pango was very original. I will definitely say that. And like I said, I think the most striking image I agree with was it the production team.
Someone at Kickstarter.
Oh, okay. They were like, wow,
that said, oh, you've got to use that.
Yeah, love that. And I will say also, Thomas, that I looked at the different levels on Kickstarter that you guys have, and I mean, there's a ton of different options and levels, and each one has really kind of original rewards, I would have to say.
Well, we tried, like, the tin type copies I'm actually really excited about because we made some test ones, and those turned out great. So you could get a metal print of this photo that we're talking about that's on metal. I think they're 11 by 14, and they look great. They look just like the tin types. And then, like Dave McKean, the painter who did Arkham Asylum and all the Sandman covers, he designed our main movie poster.
Is that the man behind bars, Thomas?
Yes.
Wow,
yes.
Yeah, I like that one too.
Yeah. Well, Dave is a huge, huge silent film fan, German expressionist cinema. And that was the image for him that was the compelling moment in the story, without giving that part away.
Yeah, no, we're going to leave that one right there. Yeah.
That's capturing a really, really dynamic reveal moment. And that's so that's why he picked that to be his spot. And then other, Gail Pataki and Brahm and Jeremy Bastian. There's definitely a lot of artists that did really cool artworks for us that we are making art prints of. And so I'm a big fan I love the merchandise associated with the old 50s films. And we didn't want this just to be, I don't know, you give us money and you get a t-shirt. I mean, not that I don't like the t-shirt that we designed, but I really wanted to make some cool and strange things. We have Genesis Peorage from Psychic TV and Throbbing Gristle was the first industrial musician. And Genesis was actually the voice of the monster. And so we have a wax cylinder that has thereminist Armin Ra, Brian Viglione from the Dresden Dolls, and Genesis in a song that's not going to be released on the vinyl soundtrack, so you can only hear it if you have a turn-of-the-century wax cylinder player. That is absolutely as eccentric as we could get with making something.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty darn original. Strange. Yeah, it's awesome.
Well, people have said, are you going to give us a digital download? And my answer has been no.
Right.
And then people have asked me, well, don't you think that's rude? And I'm like, I remember when you wanted like a 7-inch single that had an unreleased B-side, and you couldn't just download it. You had to go to record stores. You had to, you had to seek it out. And so I said, I feel like we should have one thing kind of out of respect to the fact that this is a 19th century story.
Right.
That's a really big prize for someone who wants to do that legwork. And so far, it's only one person. So we'll see. That one person is going to be the one person that owns this recording. It'll be just kind of a weird little, buried treasure out there in the world.
Well, we'll see if we can get some more people battling it out for some of these rewards, shall we? Yeah, let's give out where they need to find it on Kickstarter. It's obviously Kickstarter.com, but let them know the best way to find it, the easiest way.
If you go to aurorafilm.info, that's our hub for everything. So if you go to aurorafilm.info, there's a button right there that'll take you straight to the Kickstarter. The reason we did that is so that after the Kickstarter is over, the place where we've directed everyone is going to be the hub for whatever the next steps are.
Nice.
So whether it's screenings, I mean, assuming that we hit our funding, the movie will be done by the end of the year. So right after that, screenings will start, and that stuff will all be listed on aurorafilm.info as well. So that's the best place.
Well, Thomas, thank you so much for coming on. And
oh my God, thank you so much.
You bet. Yeah, and come on anytime if you have anything else, coming up. And of course, once this film, I have high hopes that we're all going to be able to see it. So you're going to have to come back on and let us know how that's
going.
going.
I'm very excited to hear what you think when it's done.
Can't wait to see it. Thanks again, Thomas.
Thank you so much. We'll speak soon.
Well, I'm so-and-so. I was given this name by my parents. I've been to such and such a college. I've done these things in my profession. I produce a little biography. Buddha says, forget it. That's not true. That's some story. That's all gone. That's all past. I want to see the real you are now. Well, nobody knows who that is. Because we don't know ourselves except through listening to our echoes and consulting our memories. And then there's a real you, and that again leads us back to this question. Who are you? That is the real you. We shall see how they play with this exam by the cohorts to get you to come out of your shell and find out who you really are. he says, when you settle down in the train to read your newspaper and so on, you are not the same person who a little while ago left the platform. If you think you are linking your moments up in a chain. And this is what binds you to the wheel of birth and death. But when you know that every moment in which you are is the only moment, this comes into Zen. A master will say to somebody, get up and walk across the room. And he comes back and he says, where are your footprints? They've gone. So where are you? Who are you? When we are asked who we are, we usually give a kind of recitation of a history.